Every day, somewhere in the Imperium of Man, a ship the color of a coffin arrives in orbit over a human world. It is called a black ship, and it has come to collect a tithe, not of grain, not of gold, but of people. Specifically, the psykers, the men, women, and children born with a spark of the warp in their minds. Most of them will never see another sunrise, because at the heart of the Imperium, beneath the Imperial Palace on Terra, sits the golden throne, and the golden throne is hungry. Every single day, it consumes roughly 1,000 psykers. Not 1,000 a year, not 1,000 a generation, 1,000 a day. Their souls are fed into the oldest machine in the galaxy and burned to ash to keep one man on his chair. 10,000 years of this. Do the arithmetic no one in the Imperium dares to do out loud, and you are looking at the largest, sustained act of human sacrifice in the history of the species. Billions of minds fed into a furnace to keep the Emperor alive.
Except 1,000 souls a day is not the cost of keeping a man alive.
It is the cost of keeping something contained. And that changes what the throne actually is. So let me tell you what we're doing here, because it is not the usual thing. We are not going to stand at the foot of that chair and ask whether the man on it is breathing. We are going to do something the Imperium has spent 10,000 years making sure no one does. We are going to open the ledger. We are going to count. The figure at the center of this is a psyker, pronounced psyker. The P is silent. A human being born with a thread of the immaterium running through their soul. The institution that harvests them is the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, the Astra Telepathica, the Order of the Black Ships. And the beam of light their deaths are said to power is the Astronomican, the Emperor's psychic beacon. Hold those three words.
They are the only vocabulary you need.
And by the end, they are going to add up to a number the priests of Terra would rather you never reached. Start with the harvest, because the harvest is where the accounting begins. The black ships do not raid. They arrive and they invoice. When one of these vessels reaches a world, the planetary governor is handed a bill, a levy of unsanctioned psykers, drawn from the population like a tax. According to the Warhammer 40,000 canon, as set out across the Adeptus Astra Telepathica and Black Ship's records, the governor is expected to have them ready. The tainted ones, the ones touched by the warp in ways that make them dangerous, are dealt with on the spot. The rest are loaded aboard and taken to Terra. And here is the first detail the Imperium does not advertise. The overwhelming majority of them are not going to Terra to be trained. They are going to be consumed.
The Black Ship's wiki entry puts it with a bluntness the ecclesiarchy never would.
The majority of these people are, and I am quoting the canon framing here, fated to be fed to the golden throne. Fed, that is the verb, not recruited, not conscripted, not enlisted, fed. And the scale of the feeding is the whole story. By the estimates that circulate through the lore, the black ships gather something on the order of 1 million psykers a year across the galaxy, and the daily appetite at the other end. The number marched into the dark beneath the palace and never seen again, sits at roughly 1,000 human beings per solar day. That is the headline figure. That is the number on the first line of the ledger. And before we do anything clever with it, sit with it as it is. 1,000 people. Today. And tomorrow another 1,000. And the day after that, another. The machine does not observe holidays. The machine has not skipped a single day in 10,000 years.
It is worth slowing down on what happens between the ship and the throne, because the machinery of it is its own quiet horror, and it tells you how routine the Imperium has made this. The vessels of the Black Fleet are not crewed by ordinary soldiers. They are overseen by the Sisters of Silence, the Null Maidens, women born without a soul presence in the warp, who are anathema to psykers, whose very nearness shuts a witch's power off like a tap. They are the perfect wardens for this cargo precisely because they cannot be touched by it. When the harvest reaches Terra, the adepts of the Astra Telepathica sort it. Some are strong enough and stable enough to be made into sanctioned psykers, kept alive to serve. Many more are put through a ritual the canon calls soul binding, a binding to the Emperor himself that hardens the mind against possession, and which, for the astropaths, very often takes their sight as the price. And the rest, the bulk of every shipment, go to the machine.
The sorting is not cruelty for its own sake. It is logistics. It is a supply chain, run with the same bureaucratic calm you would use to route grain, and the product at the end of the line is human souls. That ordinariness, the invoice, the levy, the sorting, the ledger, is exactly what lets 1,000 a day toll continue for 100 centuries without anyone, anywhere, screaming. And here is the first place the official story starts to feel thin. Because if this were truly the upkeep of a single beloved god, a sacred, exceptional thing, you would expect it to feel sacred and exceptional. Instead, it has the texture of a utility bill. It is metered. It is industrial. It scales like infrastructure, not like devotion. Keep that texture in mind because it is going to matter when we ask what kind of thing actually needs to be fed this way. Now, the arithmetic that no one runs. Let's run it, slowly, because the slowness is the point. 1,000 a day. Multiply by the days in a year, and you are already past 1/3 of a million souls in 12 months. 365,000 in 1 year. Now, take that and stretch it across the span the Emperor has sat on that chair. And the canon is consistent on this number. Over 10,000 standard years since the siege of Terra. 10,000 years. Multiply it out. 1,000 times 365 times 10,000. The figure you land on is in the billions, not millions. Billions of psykers, billions of human minds, fed into a single machine, one day at a time, for the length of recorded imperial history. There is no event in the real human past that compares to it, and there is no event in the fictional human future of this setting that comes close either. It is, examined coldly, the largest sustained act of sacrifice ever conceived, and it has a single stated justification: to keep one man alive. And lest you think the 1,000 a day figure is some loose fan estimate, the canon stages it for you directly. In Aaron Dembski-Bowden's novel, The Master of Mankind, the single most authoritative source on what the throne actually is and does, there is a moment where the Emperor needs to leave the chair. He needs to step away from the machine and go somewhere himself, in person. And to do that, he has to keep the throne running in his absence. How does he pay for a single day off the chair? He orders the Sisters of Silence to gather 1,000 psykers from across the galaxy and deliver them to the machine. 1,000 souls. For 1 day. That is the canon's own exchange rate, written into the plot of its most important throne novel. 1 day of operation costs 1,000 minds. Run the conversion in the other direction, and the daily appetite is no longer an estimate. It is the price the Emperor himself paid, on the page, to buy himself 24 hours of freedom. Here is where the accountant in the room raises a hand. Because that justification does not survive contact with the numbers. Think about what life support is, in any frame you like. Life support is a cost you pay to hold a living thing at a stable level, to stop it from getting worse.
And the defining feature of life support is that it scales with the patient, not with the centuries. A body on a machine does not require more every year simply because the years are passing. But that is exactly what the throne does. By the records, around 989 M36, as the eye of Terror tore wider, the tech priests who serviced the throne demanded an increase in the daily count. And by early M41, by some accounts, 4 times as many psykers were being consumed each day as in the era right after the emperor first took the chair. 4 times. The cost is not holding steady, the cost is climbing. And a cost that climbs, decade over decade, century over century, is not the signature of maintenance. It is the signature of something losing. Something that needs more and more power just to stay where it is. Put the 2 cost curves side by side, because the comparison is the whole case in miniature. Imagine the most expensive patient you can, a being of immense psychic power, a body wrecked beyond any normal repair, kept in stasis by impossible ancient technology. Grant that such a patient costs more than any ordinary life. Fine. But a life support cost, however enormous, is a flat line. It is a price you pay to hold a level. It does not need to grow because the patient is not getting larger or stronger. If anything, a stabilized patient costs less over time, not more, as the crisis of the wounding recedes. Now draw the throne's actual curve. It does not flatten. It does not fall. It rises, measurably by the records, to something like 4 times its original draw across the span between the early Imperium and the 41st millennium. A flat cost says holding steady. A rising cost says losing ground. And a cost that has been rising for 10,000 years against a patient who has only ever gotten worse is not the arithmetic of keeping someone alive. It is the arithmetic of a struggle, of a force that has to be answered with more and more power simply to keep the situation from changing. You do not pour increasing resource into a thing you are merely maintaining. You pour increasing resource into a thing you are barely holding. And this is where the canon starts to contradict the story the Imperium tells about it. Because if you ask the official sources what the throne is, the first answer you get is life support, a cybernetic mechanism from the dark age of technology, sustaining the emperor's crippled body in stasis after his mortal wounding at the close of the Horus heresy. Stasis fields, psi fusion reactors, the vocabulary of a hospital. But read one line further into that same canon and the picture fractures. Because the throne does more than one thing, and the second thing it does is far larger than the first. That second thing is the astronomicon, the beacon, the light. Across the lore, and it is laid out in detail in Graham McNeil's novel, The Outcast Dead, which takes you inside the city of sight where the beam is made. The astronomicon is a psychic signal the emperor projects out of the throne, across tens of thousands of light years, somewhere in the range of 50 to 70,000 light years by the published figures, far enough to wash over most of the galaxy. It is the lighthouse every Imperial ship steers by. Without it, the warp is an unlit ocean, and the Imperium does not so much fall as simply come apart, world by isolated world. And that beacon has an appetite of its own. By the canon set down in Chris Wright's Watchers of the Throne and the Astronomicon records, the beam is fed by a choir, 10,000 specially chosen psykers, channeling their life into the signal, with up to 1,000 of them dying every single day and being replaced by the next shipload off the Black Fleet. Now hold on, because this is the crux, and it is also the strongest argument against everything I am about to say, so I am going to give it to you at full strength rather than hide it.
If the Astronomicon alone eats 1,000 psykers a day, then the 1,000-a-day figure is already explained. You do not need a sinister second theory. A galaxy-spanning beacon is simply that expensive. The lighthouse runs on souls because, in this universe, only a soul attuned to the warp can bridge the gap between real space and the immaterium. No coal, no plasma, no reactor can throw a psychic beam across the stars.
So the honest counter to this entire video is one sentence. Maybe the throne spins 1,000 a day because beacons cost 1,000 a day, and there is nothing hidden underneath it at all. I want you to hold that counter in one hand the whole way through, because the case I am about to make does not get to ignore it. It has to get past it. And the way it gets past it is by looking not at the beacon, but at the man. The constancy, the 1,000 a day, the Astronomicon explains. What the Astronomicon does not explain is the climb. A beacon is a fixed broadcast. Its cost should track the strength of the signal, not crawl steadily upward across 10,000 years of an unchanging galaxy-wide function. But the throne's appetite has multiplied, fourfold by early M41, and that surplus, the part the beacon does not account for, has to be doing something other than shining a light.
And the canon hands us a candidate, quietly, in a single line buried under all the talk of life support. The throne, the sources say, also holds a seal. Beneath the Imperial Palace, there is a breach in the Eldari webway, a tear into the immaterium that opened during the Emperor's great secret project. And the Emperor's psychic power is what keeps that tear shut. He cannot leave the chair, not because his body would fail, but because if he stands, the door opens. That is not life support. That is a hand pressed against a door. That is containment. And we know how that door came to be, because the Master of Mankind tells the whole story. The breach was not an accident of nature. The Emperor had been building something extraordinary beneath Terra, a portal into the webway, the Eldari road through the stars, meant to free humanity from the warp forever. It was his great work, the secret project, and it was almost finished. Then his son Magnus, trying to warn him of a betrayal, tore through the warp with forbidden sorcery and shattered the unfinished portal from the inside. The careful seal cracked. The road opened onto the immaterium, and the demons came through it, into the tunnels beneath the palace. That is the breach. That is the door. And in the novel, when the Emperor finally bought himself that single day of freedom with 1,000 souls and went down into the webway in person, appearing, the text says, as a dawn made of golden psychic fire before the demon hordes. What did he do with his one day? He did not heal himself. He did not escape. He fought his way to the worst thing down there, a demon weapon, and he sealed it away. And then he sealed the portal itself to save Terra. And the price of sealing it was that he had to come back to the chair and, in the canon's own word, become a prisoner to the operation of the Golden Throne. Prisoner, not patient. The novel chooses the word, and the word is the whole argument. Let me build that out because it is the analytical heart of this. Sit with the difference between two kinds of system. The first kind stabilizes and heals. You put a wounded thing into it, and over time, with enough resource, the thing gets better, or, at minimum, it holds. The second kind contains. You put a dangerous thing into it and the thing does not heal, because healing was never the goal. The goal is to stop it from getting out, and the cost of that goes up as the thing inside strains harder against the walls. Now, ask which one the Golden Throne behaves like. Across 10,000 years, the man on the chair has not improved, not once. The canon is explicit and relentless about this.
His body has crumbled steadily into what the lore calls a withered husk, a rotting form held in stasis, never recovering, only decaying.
10 millennia of the most concentrated resource expenditure in galactic history, and the patient has gotten worse every single year. No hospital on any world runs like that, but every prison does. A continuous, escalating cost with no recovery ever. That is not the profile of a thing being healed. It is the profile of a thing being held. There is a second signature, and it points the same way. The machine itself is failing. By the lore, the Golden Throne is falling apart, and even the Mechanicus, the tech priests who tend it, admit they have no idea how to repair it. They do not understand the Dark Age technology they are maintaining. They keep it running by ritual, not by knowledge, and every year a little more of it degrades. There is even an account of a repair attempt that went so badly it nearly ended the Emperor on the spot. Now layer that on top of the rising fuel bill. The cost is climbing, the patient is decaying, and the apparatus holding it all together is itself wearing out and cannot be fixed. That is not a stable hospital. That is a containment vessel under strain, demanding more and more energy to hold a deteriorating thing in place, with no one left who knows how the walls were built. And the in-universe characters who get close to this truth do not survive it comfortably. In Graham McNeil's The Outcast Dead, an astropath named Kai Zulaine is given a vision of the war's outcome, and what he sees is that there is no clean victory. Either humanity is consumed outright, or the Imperium wins, but only at the cost of the Emperor, a victory that buys 10,000 years of slow decay, the chair, the toll, the rot. The cost was foreseen at the very beginning, by someone inside the system, and it nearly broke his mind to carry it. The secret of what the survival of the Emperor would actually cost is the kind of thing that, in this universe, gets a man hunted through the underworld of Terra for knowing. This is the exact reading one viewer reached on their own, under the most watched version of this question on the platform. A comment that drew 115 likes, and it is the cleanest, one-line statement of the case I have found anywhere. The throne keeps him dead makes more sense. 1,000 psykers a day. That is it. That is the whole argument compressed into 11 words. The scale is the tell. You do not spend the souls of billions to keep one man comfortable. You spend the souls of billions when the alternative, letting whatever is on that chair come fully loose, is worse than the price. I want to be exact about what is fact here and what is inference, because the Imperium traffics in blurring exactly that line, and we are not going to copy them. The fact is, the scale. The 1,000 a day is in the canon. The climb to fourfold is in the canon. The 10,000-year decay with no recovery is in the canon. The fact is the webway seal. The throne does demonstrably hold a door shut beneath the palace. The inference, and it is an inference, I am flagging it plainly, is that the whole apparatus is best read as a containment engine rather than a sickbed, and that the thing being contained may be more than just the breach in the floor. The canon never writes the sentence "the throne contains the emperor." It writes that the throne sustains him and that he, in turn, seals the door. The reading that collapses those into one, that the sustaining is the containment, is ours, not the codex's. Hold it as a strong argument, not a settled fact. So why psykers? Of every resource the Imperium could throw at the problem, why must the fuel be human souls, and specifically, the souls of the warp-touched? This is where the containment reading stops being a vibe and starts being mechanical. In this universe, the warp is not powered by ordinary energy, and it cannot be touched by ordinary means. A psyker is the only kind of conduit that exists.
a living bridge between the material world and the immaterium. Warhammer Guild's lore breakdown puts it cleanly. No conventional energy source in the setting can span the gap between real space and the warp the way a psyker's soul can. Which means whatever the throne is doing, it is doing it in the warp. You do not spend 1,000 warp-attuned souls a day to run a light bulb or a heart monitor. Those you could power 1,000 cheaper ways. You spend warp-attuned souls when the task itself is a warp task. Anchoring something, holding something, keeping something fixed in place against a tide that is pure immaterium. The fuel tells you the function. The throne is not paying for a body.
It is paying for a position. A thing held still in the one place a thing like that does not want to be still. And think about what soul binding actually was. That ritual the Astra Telepathica performs on the harvest before the machine takes them. The lore tells us its purpose is to harden a mind against possession by the things in the warp. It is armor against the immaterium. Now ask why the fuel for this machine needs to be armored against the warp before it is consumed. You do not armor your firewood before you light it. You armor something before you send it into a fight. The very preparation of the fuel implies that what waits at the other end is not a furnace in the ordinary sense, but a front line, a place where unprotected souls would be torn open by what is pressing against the seal. The Imperium has built an entire sacred bureaucracy around feeding warp-hardened souls into a single point beneath the palace. And the only kind of point that demands warp-hardened souls is a point where the warp is actively trying to get through. That is not the description of a power plant. That is the description of a wall under siege, restocked every single day with 1,000 fresh defenders, because 1,000 of yesterday's defenders did not last the night. And now we arrive at the part the religion cannot say out loud. The reason the accounting has been kept off the books for 10,000 years. Picture the Imperial Creed trying to print the honest version. Picture a sermon that opens. Today, as every day, the Adeptus Astra Telepathica delivered 1,000 souls to the machine beneath the palace, not to save a living god, but to keep a sealed thing sealed and a decaying thing from coming loose. No faith survives that sentence. The entire moral architecture of the Imperium rests on a single, load-bearing lie. That the man on the chair is alive, that he is a god, and that the souls are a gift of devotion freely given to a being who deserves them. Take that away. Admit that the Emperor is not so much a god being worshipped as a danger being managed, and the 1,000 a day stops being a sacrament and becomes what it actually is, a maintenance bill on a containment field. The doctrine of the living emperor is not a comfort the Imperium tells itself by accident. It is the only thing that makes the death toll tolerable to the people paying it. The lie is structural. Pull it, and the furnace stands exposed with nothing draped over it. And notice how perfectly the doctrine is shaped to hide exactly this question. The Imperial Creed does not merely claim the Emperor is alive. It claims that to ask is heresy. It makes the very act of opening the ledger, the thing we are doing right now, into a crime against the soul. That is a strange amount of protection to wrap around a simple medical fact. If the man on the chair were genuinely just a wounded god on advanced life support, the truth would be a comfort, not a danger. You would teach it openly, the way you teach any tragedy of a beloved leader. You do not criminalize the questioning of something that is merely sad. You criminalize the questioning of something that is load-bearing, something that, if examined honestly, would pull the floor out from under everyone standing on it. The ferocity of the prohibition is itself a data point. The Imperium guards this question the way you guard a thing that cannot withstand being asked. And the harvest never pauses to let anyone ask it.
There is always another ship inbound, another levy due, another 1,000 going down into the dark. And the relentlessness of the supply is its own kind of silence. You cannot count the ash if the furnace never cools long enough for you to look inside. Here, too, I owe you the honest caveat, the same one I gave at the start, because it has not gone away. The Emperor is not, in canon, simply a corpse. The official record holds him as neither dead nor truly alive, a thing in between, his body ruined but his mind still active, still warding Terra, still throwing the beacon, even speaking, in the recent era, with his returned son, Gilliman. So if you want to defend the chair, the defense is real. Maybe he is a living patient whose impossible psychic burden simply costs impossibly much, and the beacon, plus the wards, plus the seal, genuinely do add up to 1,000 a day with no dark accounting underneath. I cannot stand here and tell you the Codex rules that out because it doesn't.
What I can tell you is that the shape of the spending, escalating, never recovering, paid in the one currency that only buys warp work, fits a containment engine better than it fits a sickbed. The canon leaves the door ajar on purpose. We are reading the draft that comes through the gap. Which brings us back to the harvest, and to the only honest way to look at it now. Every day, the ship the color of a coffin makes orbit over another world. Every day, a governor hands over the levy. Every day, 1,000 of them go down into the dark beneath the palace, and the most sacred ritual in the human religion completes itself one more time. Examined honestly, with the ledger open and the arithmetic done, that ritual is the largest furnace ever built, and the worshippers have been told the smoke rising off it is mercy. Maybe the thing on the throne is alive. Maybe it is dead. Maybe it is the impossible in-between the canon insists on.
It almost does not matter which, because the toll says the same thing under all three readings. The spending does not look like the price of keeping someone alive. It looks like the price of keeping something here, fixed, sealed, held against a door it spends every hour trying to open. This was never the maintenance of a living God. It was, from the first day, the cost of the lid. 1,000 souls a day. Say it slowly, because the Imperium never will. 1,000 human beings, every single day, for 10,000 years, fed into a golden machine and burned down to nothing, so that one man does not have to leave his chair. The faithful call it the greatest act of devotion in human history. But devotion doesn't have a body count in the billions. You do not burn a species to keep a god breathing. You burn a species to keep a door from opening. The Golden Throne was never the seat of a living emperor.
It's the lid on something. And the 1,000 souls a day are what it costs to keep the lid on. The Imperium has been calling its furnace a throne for 10,000 years. It's time someone counted the ash.